Okay, I want to go over some of the basics with the diffuser and the baffle wave. Of course, that's the main purpose of an expansion chamber. On this page of mine, which completely explains the basics, you've got this little graphic right here. And this is the diffuser wave, which is very right of center of the wave, looking at the start and the end of the wave. Of course, this isn't the true end of the wave. When you have a nice straight line there between the two, it's because the belly is is short enough to cause the trailing end of the diffuser wave and the beginning of the baffle to overlap and to cancel. So the real end of that wave would probably be about right here. But anyway, as the as the piston, if you look at this green crosshair and you think of it as being a piston, right now the top of it is yeah, the top of it is at the lowest point in the cylinder, and this right here would be the highest point in the cylinder. As it's rising, well, first as it's descending, before the transfer is open, it is compressing the intake charge in the crankcase. Compressing. Now the transfer is open, and that transfer is going into the upper cylinder. Okay. Because of inertial effects, it's a little bit past bottom dead center when the end of that transfer happens. And then, if there was no diffuser wave right here, the rising of the piston up until transfer closing, well, even beyond, is going to be causing a suction in the crankcase just by the expansion of the area. And so it's going to want to suck that intake charge back down from the upper cylinder into the crankcase. And that's the purpose of the diffuser wave, to put a suction in the upper cylinder to match the suction in the crankcase. And if you don't match that, the suction in the crankcase is going to pull that charge down into the crankcase. So in an ideal world, you'd have from 0 to its maximum value right at transfer closing. And the closest we can get to that with a regular expansion chamber is a multi-cone diffuser with gradually increasing angles. And that's what we have represented here, the diffuser wave of a 3-cone diffuser. Now what happens as the piston continues to rise past transfer closing, right as you reach transfer closing, you've sealed off the crankcase. Okay, as it's rising, it's going to continue to cause a vacuum in the crankcase, and that's going to draw in more intake charge from the carburetor. But now in the upper cylinder, it's going to want, the piston wants to pressurize that intake charge. But your port is open. Your exhaust port is open. So it's going to be pushing that intake charge right out the exhaust port. And that's why you want the baffle wave. You want a pressure wave coming towards the cylinder to counteract the pressure that the raising of the piston is going to cause. So if you get an equilibrium, an increase of the baffle wave as the piston increases towards exhaust closing, you're going to maintain that pressure. Okay? And then past exhaust closing, it doesn't matter what the return waves are doing because they're sealed off. They are completely sealed off from the cylinder then. Okay? So it's a no-brainer concerning the diffuser wave, what we need. This is a 3-cone diffuser wave. What we need is gradually increasing angles. On the baffle, this is the pipe power band of a single cone. It's a little bit left to center. Of a baffle with increasing angles, it's definitely left of center. And an inverse to normal baffle is with decreasing angles is right of center. And how that affects the power band is reflected over here. This little hump that the red graph makes above the blue graph is because of the mostly at the pressure at exhaust closing, and somewhat before that. So you can see by looking at this hump right here, the acceleration power, which is the power above the baseline of what's needed to maintain the speed, is the fattest. That curve raises the most from the beginning of the gear to the end of the gear. And a single cone, it's flatter. And the increasing angle 3-cone baffle, it's almost flat. And you can see where the baffle wave helps out on the power. Like I said, this is left of center. You can see it left of center right here. So right here, if you look, I've got a note of what the average of the power is from the beginning to the end of each one of these. And this one is 26.5. This one is 26.94. And this is 27.46. I'm going to do the math here. 27.46 minus 26.5 is divided by 26.5 is 3.6% more. So this odd type of baffle gives you almost 4% more power, average power, within that gear. These are all second to the last gear. 4% is not a lot, but if you know anything about racing and race bikes, every percentage counts. You do a little something to the carburetor, you do a little something to the reed valve, you do a little something to the head, a little something to the exhaust pipe, and it all adds up. And it'll make the difference of just a little bit more acceleration than the next bike. And in racing, that's all you need. Your competition, all you need is a little bit of an edge over them. And that can make all the difference in who holds that first place trophy. Okay, so if we're talking about competition, an expert rider will always keep the bike within the power band. So you want whatever it takes to have the best power within that gear RPM range. But if you're going to be on the trail or on the street, this would be the better baffle to choose. Even though you have less power here, you have more power over here. So when you fall out of the typical range that you're normally in, well, you're actually still within the power band anywhere to the right of where these two lines meet. But if you're shifting at the end of the peak of the bike power, which is typical, then this is the range you're going to be using most typically. So you have a little bit more evenness from the beginning of the power band to the end with this type of baffle than with this type. It falls off more here. This is a steeper decline here. So it's more critical that you stay within the typical range of RPM that you use in the gear. These are the two return waves of the two types of baffles. This is a single cone that's right of center. And this is the new design. I say new, but it's not really. Where is center? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 17, about right here, center. So they're both a little bit right of center, but if you look right here, this more approximates a straight line than this one does. This is, you get more airspace here. It's not a big difference, but sometimes the smallest of differences make a big difference. You can see also just looking at it, it's fatter. This is skinnier here. So if we look at that here on the expansion chamber calculator, yeah. Last but not least, the belly length. On the calculator, on sheet 1, I give recommendations for belly lengths, but you can always experiment yourself and see how it turns out with the pipe power and the acceleration power. Big difference, huh? So generally speaking, the shorter the belly, the steeper these two angles are right here. And which is better for high RPM power, but because you're encroaching on that baffle wave, you're shortening the power band. Basically speaking, the power band is pretty much from this point at the end of it, when the crossover is right at transfer closing, in this case at 10,000, and when the crossover is when this, not the crossover, when the end of the baffle wave is close to EC. So right here, just a little bit beyond that is when it starts to rise here. And you're beginning to to capture some of that, or to keep some of that intake charge from leaving. The more pressure you have at the exhaust closing, the better off that is. The more supercharging effect you have. So basically, it's from the end of the baffle wave at EC to crossover at TC. That's your pipe power band. Oh boy. Like I said, you can play with the belly. If I want it to end at 10,000, and I'm going to increase the belly because I'm less concerned about peak power than I am about the breadth of the pipe power band. You see it's gotten away from transfer closing a little bit, so I'm going to have to compensate here at the header. Bring that back so that at the same RPM you've got that crossover happening at TC. Something that I covered on this page also was the effect of the belly being so much larger than the header. This graph right here shows an absolute PSI, which is normal pressure plus 14.7. The 0 PSI that we can see on a gauge is not really 0. It's not absolute. It's relative to what our experience is, because the column of air over our heads is causing the pressure really to be 14.7, but our gauges are set for 0. Okay, so the absolute pressure versus the belly's number times the header area. You've heard it said before that 2.5 is the maximum for a belly size. Well, if you look at it this way, you could look at it as a rate of PSI change for belly area. So you get the highest rate of change closest to the header, and the wider that belly gets, the lesser rate of change you get. And that rate of change is very important because that is what causes the return wave. The pressure wave change is what causes the return wave strength. Okay, so the more steep this is, the more change you're having in PSI, and the stronger that return wave is. So it's like saying the skinnier the belly is, the more effective it is at being able to return a return wave. But you don't want to stay with the skinny belly because you're not utilizing the full, you're not completely utilizing, you're using up the pressure of the exhaust pulse. You don't do that until all the way out here. Well, not even there. It may take 7 times the header area to finally get to 1, which is the same, to say that it's the same pressure as well as no pressure, to use up all the pressure change. But the rate of change is very important to us. So the closer we get, the farther we get past 2.5, the harder it is for us to utilize that area change, and so we have to compensate for that with more angle. And so we do that with the diffuser by increasing the angles, making this very shallow, like 3.5 degrees, this would be like 6 or 7 degrees, and this would be like 14 degrees. But the same thing applies with the baffle. This type of baffle is very rare. If you look on Google, it is very hard to find a baffle that's shaped like this. Why? It may be because most of the pipes made only go up to that 2.5 times header size. So the farther you go out, the wider that belly becomes, the more this topic is of importance. So these angles right here are steeper because the area change causes the pressure change. But it's harder to do that with the really large belly sizes. So you have to have more abrupt area changes to get an equivalent same PSI change as you can easily get with, let's say, the middle section here. So on the examples of the graphs that I gave before, this is the design that I used. To get these graphs out here, this is the design. And when I designed this, I just basically chose these 3 angles to give almost the same starting pressure change number, 35. And this went up to, what did I say, 50, yeah. So these are the numbers that I input at on sheet 3. Okay, but if you can look the starting numbers, 35, 35, 38. And I just kept fooling with these angles until I got those 3 close. So that would be a general guideline to go by. And a good start number for this one is 50 millimeters. I made this 50, this 80, and this the remainder to make it an equivalent of the normal 190 millimeter baffle. So that's the beauty of this latest design of EC Calc, is using Boyle's law. I came to realize that the same reason you want a 3-cone diffuser is the reason you want a 3-cone baffle, because the lack of efficiency of area change with the greater belly sizes. And it would be ridiculous to think that this needs it but this doesn't. No, you've got the same inept efficiency at this area here, this large section of the pipe, on both sides of the belly. So this is important to know, and probably the next chance I'll get, I'm going to make one like this.